The Colorado Avalanche had yet another comeback win versus the Sabres to make it 6 wins in a row. Plus, Thatcher Demko left the Vancouver game early. Are the Canucks in long-term goalie trouble? And Canada exits the World Juniors early again. What is the narrative there? And how did the rest of the quarterfinal matchups end up? All on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everyone, and thanks for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner from Locked On Flyers. I'm here each and every Friday with Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. You can find us wherever you listen your podcasts and subscribe to get our latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can keep the season going with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $250 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Gil, how are we doing this Friday?
We are doing well. Can't believe we're in 2025 already. Happy New Year to everybody out there. And, calendar flipped, but certain teams doing kind of the same, right?
Yeah, we are at the midway point in the season or thereabouts for many of the teams catching up to that 41st game right now. One of the teams that's doing very well at the moment is the Colorado Avalanche. They just had a remarkable 3-goal comeback win over the Buffalo Sabres. Chris and Kyle from Locked On Avs had something to say about it.
This was one of the most ridiculous games I can even recall. Like, I was sitting here before we were getting ready to record, trying to remember there was another game that rivaled the amount of ups and downs and goods and bads and clutch moments and boneheaded decisions and referees. And this was just an epic game, epic game. If this didn't fire you up, your wood's wet.
But you get the game-tying goal, pulling a goal. First of all, let's give a big congratulations to the Avalanche for not giving up an empty net goal, because that is something that has been rarely seen this year. And the fact that you net the one with 5 or 6 seconds left, man, that place was just absolutely rocking. And then you go into overtime, and it's Devon Toews of all people who has the breakaway goal. Just epic. Just from that, again, from that third period on, that's the only word you can use for. I mean, you can use a lot of words. It's not the only word. But it was just so exciting and entertaining, and why this is the best sport in the world.
All right. Well, they seem to be pretty happy about it, and I'm sure Avs fans were too. They're right. Like, it was a bonkers game with just about everything. They didn't even, in that little blurb, mention the controversial goal in that game in the third period where Colorado, they're fighting back, they get within one, and then that Benson goal for Buffalo with Wedgwood down. Blackwood has to come in to replace him after that, and they still won the game, Gil.
Yeah, just an unbelievable comeback. You're down early 3-0, and you're able to come back from 3-0, from 4-2, 5-3. You score the tying goal with less than 10 seconds left, and then you win it in overtime on the breakaway goal by Devon Toews. What a great, persistent comeback by the Colorado Avalanche, and right now the Avs are just hitting on all cylinders.
Yeah, and it's really important at this part of the season to be starting to hit that peak performance, right? Because you want to get into a really good spot before the Four Nations break so that you then can get a little bit of rest and continue that forward, right? And so, coming into this midway point of the season on a win streak like they have, it is, again, super, super important here. And especially, given where they are in the standings right now, I think, it's going to be important for them to keep fighting to stay in that top three, right?
Yeah, I mean the Central Division is so tight between Winnipeg, Minnesota, who just continues to surprise and keeps finding ways to win,
Yeah.
Colorado and Dallas. You've got for the Avalanche, they passed Dallas in the standings, but the Stars still have a couple of games in hand. It is not going to be easy. So jockeying for position, every point counts. And, the points that you leave on the table in January are going to come back to haunt you in March and April.
Yeah. And, we've talked about the Avalanche when it comes to injuries. They've had a lot of them. They're generally healthy right now. Valerie Nishushkin, though, is out 7 to 10 days, according to head coach Bednar. But they still managed to pull out the win here, even with Nishushkin out, who's been like a huge part of their lineup. And, he's got 11 goals in just 21 games. So
Yeah.
that's like nothing to sneeze at there. But I do also want to talk about the return of Jonathan Drouin to the lineup there. And I think, in some ways it's only 2 games. I understand that, but it's been a little bit of a jump start there as well. He's been on the second line since returning with Middlestat and Colton. And I think it's a good combination. He had the game tying goal. Our friends were talking about not allowing the empty net goal. Well, Jonathan Drouin was the one who scored the goal on the extra attacker. And, he found open ice. Now, granted, if you look at the replay of it, the Buffalo Sabres were just nowhere to be found in the proper area of the
Yeah,
ice
very
on
disorganized,
that
to
play.
put it mildly.
Right. So, but I think it was just important for Duran to make that play. He has a goal and 3 assists in 2 games back since the injury.
Yeah, not bad. And that big tying goal, he's a +3 in the game. And look, it is so important to have more than one line in the NHL. Getting second and third lines to be at least productive. They're not going to match your top line, but having Drouin available really adds to the depth of the Colorado Avalanche and makes a big difference. And believe it or not, Gabriel Landeskog skating again. I mean, I'm not going to say he's ready to come back
Yeah, I
anytime
don't
soon,
know.
but even to mention his name with a positive, event attached to it has got to be encouraging for Avalanche fans.
Yeah, I think so. And obviously, there's a little bit of concern to be had about the goaltending, like I said, with Wedgwood having to leave the game and Blackwood coming in. And that's been like a little bit of an Achilles heel for them this season. But when you have, the rest of your team, firing on all cylinders, you're going to find ways to win. And so they do have that 6-game win streak. They're 8-2 in their last 10, and they do have a very interesting schedule upcoming for them. They have 5 games in 8 days, which is a very difficult workload for them, right? And their first game up next is against Montreal, who they themselves are on a hot streak right now. Montreal will be on the second half of a back-to-back. They play Chicago tonight. So this game on Saturday, the Avs will be a little bit more rested than Montreal going into it. But these are 2 very hot teams that are going to face each other.
Yeah, no doubt. And then it doesn't get any easier because after that, you got the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. You
Yep.
got the Blackhawks. Then you go into Minnesota and into Winnipeg against, 2 of the teams you're fighting for in the standings in the division. So it's going to be a very, very interesting next few days, next week, let's say, for the Colorado Avalanche.
Yeah, and that sequence against Chicago and the Wild, that's a back-to-back as
Yeah.
well. So they've got, in that 5 games in 8 days, they've got a back-to-back in there. And yeah, it's going to be a very tough road ahead. And I think, after this stretch, we'll have a really good sense as if this team is going to make a push here especially when the two teams above them in the standings are part of that 5 games in 8
Yeah.
days, right?
Yeah, you get to go head to head with the teams you're fighting, and it makes for some great hockey too.
Yeah, so excited to see what the Colorado Avalanche do in the next little week or so, and we'll keep an eye on Nishushkin as far as whether or not he will get back in the lineup for any of that stretch of games. It would be nice if he can get back in for that Jets game. I'm sure
Oh yeah.
they're thinking about that and what the goaltending situation is. But speaking of goaltending, the goaltending has been also an Achilles heel of the Vancouver Canucks to some degree, and they've got some questions to answer. We are going to talk about that coming up next.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. It's thrilling. And hockey fans, use your knowledge of the game of hockey and your favorite team to find exciting opportunities on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
So the Vancouver Canucks, they are in a very interesting spot when it comes to their goaltending. And I think, when you look at what's been going on there, Thatcher Demko left their game with back spasms, and he has been not super available, let's say, this season, to put it mildly. But what's your overall take on the Canucks and what they're doing? Because they did win the game against the Kraken in a shootout. They are doing okay, if not great, in the Pacific Division. But you gotta ask the goaltending question there, right?
You do, and I think the goaltending has been an issue. Look, you've only had Thatcher Demko for 7 games, and he hasn't obviously finished those games. So they've been leaning very heavily on Kevin Lankinen. And Lankinen, he started 24 games. He's 15-6-4, a .260 goals against average, a .907 save percentage, 3 shutouts so far for Kevin Lankinen. But is he a good enough goalie to carry your team in a very competitive Pacific Division? I mean, Vancouver right now is in 4th place, 3 points behind Edmonton. You got 5 points behind LA and 11 points behind Vegas, rather. So the Canucks have a hard row to hoe to try to get back into contention for the Pacific Division crown. And without their starting goalie, it's going to be even tougher.
Yeah, and it feels like, I want to say, a decade since Thatcher Demko has been like the future of the Canucks goaltending, right? And so we've been in this, well, it should be the Thatcher Demko era for them right now, but it isn't. It's Kevin Lankinen's team at the moment. And, it is partially due to the injuries, for sure. But Demko has not played anywhere near to the level of what was kind of expected in his early days with the Canucks, I think he came up a little too early, in my opinion, in terms of goaltender development. There is certainly something there, but with these injuries, and Demko and Lankinen are the same age, which is wild to me, right?
Yeah.
So they're both 29. And so that's honestly when goaltenders in the NHL should be really hitting their stride, right? And really truly have come into their own and be a starting goaltender in the NHL.
Yeah, you would
Kevin
think this would be
Lankinen,
their prime. And
exactly.
Danko, the injuries have been the big reason he has not been able to get on track this year. It certainly has affected the Canucks. And if you look big picture, he's got 1 more year left on that contract. If you're the Vancouver Canucks, would you consider trading him or buying him out in the offseason? I mean, and then if not, are you satisfied going forward with the goaltending you have left on your roster? Because I'm not sure yet if Kevin Lankinen is the goalie who could take you on a long playoff run.
I mean, I think they have to give it a try with him. That's
Yeah.
the
Oh,
thing,
yeah.
is that's what's so interesting about this situation to me, is that, so you're right, Demko's in year 4 or 5 on this contract. It's a $5 million cap hit. Like, they're paying him for nothing essentially at the moment. I mean, not nothing, but very little
Well,
at
they're
the
paying
moment.
him to rehab is what they're paying him to
Yeah,
do. So, yeah.
right? And Lincoln's on an $875K contract. He's a UFA at the end of this season, right? And so if I'm Kevin Lankinen, I'm going to test the market,
Oh, yeah.
right? And because he can get a starting job, he thinks he can get a starting job. I think he could in the NHL, especially if he performs well out the rest of the season. But it could be in the Canucks' best interest to try and re-sign him earlier, and then, to your point, potentially buy out the Demco. But it's so precarious at the moment, because do they need more time from Lankinen to prove it? Does Lankinen need the rest of the season to test the market? And where does that come out in the Canucks' needs, and maybe them wanting to negotiate early versus Lankinen wanting to test the market, right?
Yeah, and then you run the risk of losing Lankinen and then relying on Demko, who hasn't been able to stay healthy. If you don't buy him out and you bring him back as your number one next year, you better have a really good backup in place, because you can't rely on
Which they
Demko to
don't
stay
have
healthy.
right now.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So a lot of questions right now for the Vancouver Canucks in between the pipes, and I think it's sort of the biggest thing that's keeping them from, being higher up in that Pacific Division right now.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a big part of it. I think, they have an execution problem as well, I would say. Like, they're not gonna play on top of it and play a tight game every single time. And I think that's honestly why they lose some games from time to time, is they just take their foot off the gas, or they make, key mistakes here. But goaltending is a big part of it. And I just think that they're gonna have to go to free agency to get a backup. Let's just say they sign Kevin Lankinen and they can get a good deal out of him. Like, first off, are they gonna have to offer him the same amount of money as what Demko is making at $5 million? Because he sure as hell could probably get that on the open
Oh,
market.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I think they're just going to have to do that, which might necessitate the buyout, but they're going to also have to go to the free agency market for a backup, in my opinion.
No doubt about it. So, I mean, Lankinen definitely in for a big raise. And, it's not going to get easier for the Canucks, because, they play Montreal next. Nashville next at home. And then they go on a 5-game road trip to Montreal, Washington, Carolina, Toronto, and Winnipeg. So, the Canucks, it's not going to get any easier, and they're going to need Lankinen, and can't rely solely on Lankinen. They do have a back-to-back against Carolina and Toronto.
Yeah, I think that, like we were talking about in the previous segment about the Avalanche, this next stretch is so important in terms of establishing your tone for the rest of the season. Like, the beginning of the second half of the season is when you set that. And I think that they do have to get more consistent across the board, but the goaltending is going to be a huge part of that. And, there just isn't like a strong UFA goalie market for next season. I mean, I think that a couple of guys out there are going to automatically get re-signed. Like, Jake Allen is going to get re-signed,
Probably.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say Aiden Hill likely to get re-signed, right? Like, I mean, there's just not a lot out there in terms of healthy backup contender goalies out there. Even like Jonathan Quick is probably done, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Samsonov, maybe,
Mm,
maybe,
maybe.
but it's a really, really tough and tight goalie market going into next season. And the Canucks are going to have to answer all these questions. And Lankinen is probably holding all the cards here.
Oh yeah, and he knows with the goalie market being as shaky as it is that if he hits the market, he's going to make a lot more money than he is right now.
Yep, he is. But to be continued, and we'll see what happens in Vancouver. In the meantime, also in the country of Canada, World Juniors taking place in Ottawa, and Canada early exit again. The narrative is already narrativing, if that's a word, and we will get to that coming up next. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened for me. I had a couple subscriptions that I didn't realize I had two different accounts for and was still paying. Rocket Money made it so easy to track everything down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features, including subscription trackers to help you cancel services you no longer use. Cancel those unwanted subscriptions, reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right. Canada, of course, was ousted in World Juniors in the quarterfinals by Czechia. And it was a very interesting game with some interesting choices being made. And my co-host, Russ Cohen at Locked On Flyers, is in Ottawa covering the tournament. And we talked on our Friday show about the coach's challenge on goaltender interference in the third period that led to a decisive goal for the Czechs, and we are going to see what Russ had to say about that right now. Yeah, obviously that challenge on the goaltender interference.
Oh
was
my
a
God, that was the
terrible
dumbest
decision.
challenge. I watch a lot of sports, Rachel, as you know. That was the dumbest challenge I've seen in any sport at any time. Now, maybe somebody will exceed that in the future, but I brought him. I was eating. I'm all of a sudden looking. I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Is there? And I heard out of just a little bit in my ear that, that there was a challenge for goalie, and I didn't even hear the word goalie. I just heard interference, and then somebody next to me said, "Are they challenging this? This is a horrible challenge." And we were just like, this challenge is never going to fly. But this same person next to me was also saying it was out of desperation, and it was sheer desperation.
Yeah, and I think, of course, it's going to add to the narrative that they didn't really lose, right? It was officiating, and
the right question wasn't asked to him. All the question was asked to him was about what he thought of the call, and he's like, it's out of my hands. But the question should have been, what did you see that made you want to challenge that call? And I would have been interested to hear what that answer was, because I don't think there's a good answer on earth for that one.
Right. Good question, right, Gil?
Yeah, it is. And look, challenges are tough because, unfortunately, a lot of them are made on emotion. You're in a situation, you're upset, you just gave up a goal, you want to have the goal challenged, and you're frustrated and you're concerned. You have to make those challenges without emotion. You have to base it on what actually happened on the ice rather than what you want to have happened on the ice. And it was a very, very low percentage challenge.
Exactly. And I got to say, Dave Cameron, he should have been fired yesterday. I mean, that was one of the worst coached tournaments I have ever seen for a team that, granted, the roster itself, the roster construction was not, I would say, ideal given the skill that they left on the table, even bringing to the tournament. but the execution of coaching in that tournament by Dave Cameron was absolutely abysmal. And I would be screaming that from the top of my lungs. Just the player usage across the board was bad. Like, I am a Team USA girl, like USA hockey do or die. And I felt bad for this Canada team because the usage was atrocious. And one example, again, I have to pull from the Flyers prospects because I know them the best, but Oliver Bonk plays the bumper on the power play with the London Knights. They only played him at the bumper for one game. He scored, and then they went away from it again. Like,
Yeah.
how do you make decisions like that and think you're going to be successful?
No, it doesn't make sense. And I think it showed the talent is certainly there on Canada to pick a really good team, to have depth, to have a team concept. And yet, they just didn't do it. And then they didn't maximize the talent of the players they did pick. So it was sort of a double whammy. And, the fact that Canada did not hold a lead at any point in this game,
Nope.
I think it just speaks volumes about the inefficiency that was going on throughout Canada's roster and coaching and the way they utilize this team.
Yeah, and the fact that they came back and tied it up was, in spite of the coaching and not
Right.
because of it, I would say. Those kids did the absolute best they could in those circumstances, and honestly, I feel terrible for them because to a certain degree, it's on them to execute, but also there's a lot of it that was not on them, and I feel bad for them. In the meantime, in the other games, Sweden defeated Latvia 3-2. Latvia, man, so close, so
So close.
close.
They hang around,
Felberg,
don't they?
they do, and Felberg's, I think, is gonna get drafted. He
Yeah,
was
I think you're
passed
right.
over. He plays in the queue. I think he has a really good shot of getting drafted this time around. We'll see, maybe like a 4th round pick or something there. But I certainly think, given that he faced 226 shots on goal in 5 games, that's unbelievable. In that quarterfinal game against Sweden, 47 saves on 50 shots. And, it's terrible that he's the story of a loss, and Sweden actually won the game. But, I think, obviously, I think a lot of people were rooting for Latvia in that situation.
If you love the underdog, yeah. I mean that, and what a performance. I mean,
Yeah.
to lose while making 47 saves and keeping your team in a game where, talent wise, no offense to Latvia, but they're not in the same league as the Swedes, and to have them stay
Yep.
in that game the way they did was very impressive.
Yep. USA over Switzerland 7-2. Honestly, the Swiss goalie was not at his best in this game, and that was a huge part of it. I also think that Ryan Leonard has made enemies all over the country of Canada, and it is well deserved. He's a little bit of a dirty player. I think he'll fit in really nicely on the Washington Capitals in the Tom Wilson School of Hockey moving forward. But James Hagan, a draft eligible prospect, another good game with 2 goals. Danny Nelson has been a standout
Yeah, he's
in
looked
this
great.
tournament.
Islanders prospect.
Yeah, yeah. Zeev Buyam, a goal and an assist in that game. So some really good standouts for Team USA in that game. Finally, Finland over Slovakia 5-3. Finland had a big 3-0 lead in that game. Slovakia, crawled their way back into it, kind of like Latvia. Dalibor Dvorsky is the standout player on Slovakia. I thought he just was putting everything out on the table. I thought he had a really excellent tournament. And Sam Urban, the goaltender, was brought in partway through that game for Slovakia, played really well, all things considered. And he could be another goaltender picked in this upcoming draft. But Finland, of course, was victorious there. So now, Gil, we get the ultimate semifinal game of our dreams, Sweden versus Finland at 3:30 on Saturday.
Yeah, that's always a grudge match. I love that rivalry, and it should be some really entertaining hockey.
Yeah, I cannot wait for that one. It's going to be ugly and glorious at the same time, and love it. The other semifinal at 7:30 is USA versus Czechia. And I think, Czechia is so smart strategically, right? They just pick their moments and know how to capitalize on mistakes. And, Team USA is not perfect. And they have made some significant mistakes. Czechia is going to know how to pounce on them. And they're so good in terms of knowing how to face their opponent. And so it's not going to be an easy road to the gold medal game for Team USA either.
No, by no means. And any one of these four teams can emerge victorious. I think it's going to be a really exciting semifinal and final for this tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. The medal games are on Sunday. We also know that in the relegation game, Germany was victorious, so they're going to stay at the top level. Kazakhstan is going to get relegated, unfortunately, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles in this World Juniors. I can't wait for this weekend. Looking forward to all of the hockey action out there, including World Juniors. And that will do it for today's show. Thanks so much for making Locked On NHL your first listen today. For your next listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert. Get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Have a great weekend, everyone.